on your right.
Yeah, maybe we could.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a little bright over there. Oh, that's
Is that better?
better. That's better. If you could just move to the center of the.
Yeah,
That would be great.
Okay.
that's
Okay,
really
cool.
great. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
Is it like
just one sec.
it's like maybe like brighter or something? Do you think? Or no, it's okay.
I think it's okay.
Okay, yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. It's a little awkward to be talking about you while you're right there.
Don't worry about me.
Um, so great. So congrats on the success of the book.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, seems to be doing great. So we'll just talk for about 20 minutes. This is not going to be live.
Okay.
And yeah, so then we will edit it down to about 3 minutes. And then we run it next week.
Okay, thank you. Should I look at like you or the
Look
light?
at the green. Yeah, look at the light at the very top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've only done this with my mom. Sorry for
Well,
the technical problem.
no. For me to get my mom to do this would be a major feat. So congrats on that. So tell me, it seems like it might have been a kind of a painful book to write. Well, why did you pursue it? Did you get the? Did you hear me?
Sorry, you just froze for a minute.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask again.
As soon as you started asking the question, it froze.
Yeah. So I was just asking. It seems like it might have been somewhat of a painful book to write. Why did you pursue it?
Rob Peace was my roommate for 4 years in college, and I called him my best friend. Um, a remarkable guy, and 9 years after college, I was brushing my teeth next to my wife, and my phone dinged, and I learned that he died violently, pointlessly in a drug-related murder. And the funeral was 400 people from all over the world in downtown Newark mourning his death. But outside that church, it seemed like a lot of people were almost eagerly condemning him as a petty street thug or a cliche of squandered potential. And potential was certainly squandered. There's no doubt about that. But I knew he wasn't a thug, and he certainly wasn't a cliche. And in the meantime, there were just a lot of people, friends of ours, wondering why. And that was how it started, just wanting to learn why.
Yeah. And can I get you to sit back just a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Good. Sorry.
Perfecto. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So the effort to turn a man who some people might have thought as a cliche into a more complex portrait was part of the impetus, right?
Yeah, and I began to learn very early on. I mean, before I was thinking about writing a book, I was just reaching out to friends, both from Yale and from Newark, where he'd grown up. I knew some of his friends from childhood because they visited us in college, and we just started to all see how compartmentalized his life was. And people who saw him every day were realizing that maybe they didn't in the end know him all that well. And yeah, that was hard, but sitting in the kitchens and the offices and the cars and on the front stoops of over 100 people over a 2-year period, ended up being very affirming and positive, and especially when we gathered in groups, and then dialogue starts to come out, and his inflections and his moods, and yeah, we could sort of see him there again, and that was special.
Yeah. And so how did it progress from talking to friends that day of his funeral to, the much more monumental work that is required to craft a narrative and to write a book?
Yeah, it started with a visit to a friend from Yale who I had caught up with at the funeral. The funeral had a bit of a reunion aspect. And we sat down just to talk and ended up talking for about 8 hours. Very few answers, but a lot more questions. And yeah, from there it was just trying to answer as many questions as we could, while also knowing that an awful lot of questions would be impossible to answer. Obviously, the first person I sat down with when we all started to, think that maybe a book could be important, could maybe, touch some lives of, especially kids from his circumstances. Rob grew up in a hard and complicated situation, with his mother working very hard in hospital kitchens. His father was in jail for murder, and he earned admission to Yale the hard way. And yeah, the first time I sat down with his mother, she said that her lone consolation after losing her son was that she knew her son had influenced a lot of people. So I think it was just maybe the hope that he could continue to influence people for the better. He was really good at that.
Yeah. And so even though you knew him and had been his roommate, what was it still difficult to get access to the people in his life and to get them to talk to you for the book?
That's a good question, and I certainly thought it would be, especially people who didn't know me. I was in a neighborhood where I wasn't necessarily welcome, where I was an outsider, which, that's what a lot of journalists spend their lives doing. But surprisingly, I found that any of those walls tended to come down pretty fast in almost all cases. And I think that was due to the commonality of caring about Rob Peace, sort of no matter what sector of his life we inhabited. And yeah, it just ended up being a lot of laughter and shared memories, also a lot of sadness, but some catharsis in most cases. So yeah, it wasn't as big of a struggle as I expected it to be starting out.
Mm-hmm. Now you've written fiction and nonfiction. So how were the writing processes different for these two books?
Fiction, you're just sort of I work in the garage, sort of surrounded by all our baby junk, and it's very internal, obviously, solitary, and I like that. I'm a pretty extreme introvert. Nonfiction, this book was obviously very personal, so it wasn't as objective as most biographies are. But obviously I spent 2 years sort of out in the world, knocking on doors, a lot of time in schools, parks, places Rob spent his time. The most guarded place was actually Yale, far more so than any drug dealers. And yeah, that was a incredible experience. One that I was writing the most important book personally that I'll ever write, and I got to do it, with so many people who also thought it was important. and that was you know, something I treasure. That was a gift.
Yeah. And
Um,
now, and now Antoine Fuqua is set to direct the film. How involved are you going to be in that, if at all?
uh, I mean, I hope that that happens. There's a lot of reasons movies sometimes don't get made, but I think I'll just sort of be on the sidelines as a resource if they need it. Um, but I don't imagine I'll be too heavily involved in that creative process. Sort of, he's the storyteller there. I mean, he's a
Yeah.
seems like an awfully smart guy and seems to care a lot
Yeah.
about the story.
Yeah, he's a really good filmmaker. Um, so when you were creating the book and you had a first draft and the second draft and however many drafts there were, would you sort of bounce ideas off of people who knew Rob, or more like your wife, or how did you involve Rob's friends and your friends in the creation of the book?
Uh, that was a really tricky part, just because there were so many people involved, and once you let people start editing, it gets a little messy, if you can imagine. Um, I did sort of show chapters to people, people who were closely involved. But I also sort of had to live with the fact that not everyone was going to be happy with the finished product, which I think is probably the case in most nonfiction. It's a lot different talking to a guy on your front porch for a couple hours than it is sort of reading the printed word. There's a lot more authority and permanence, and that was a difficult part of nonfiction. And at a certain point, I just sort of had to take possession of it, and that wasn't totally comfortable to me, but I think it was in the best interest of telling the story.
Yeah. And has reaction among his family and friends been pretty positive, or how has that been for you?
Um, it was really interesting because a lot of reviews came out before the book came out, and they were for the most part positive, very strong reviews. But because of the subject matter, they a lot of them had a certain tone, which was a pretty sort of big and sharp tone. And it's an intimate story, and there's a lot of warmth and humor and triumph and even hope in this story. That that's the reason it needed to be a book as opposed to a long form article, say. And it's hard to reduce that stuff in the space of a couple hundred words in a book review. And yeah, people read that, and some family members and some friends got pretty upset. But then the book came out, and it's been wonderful. I've been getting a lot of messages from a lot of the same people now having read the book, and just being thankful that they got to sort of experience Rob again, and also to learn things about him that they didn't know before. So yeah, it's been progressively better.
Yeah, good. So obviously, poverty is a subject that both Democrats and Republicans like to, have big ideas about. And one of the things that I admire about this book is that it seems like it is not a book that either party could really use as an example to bolster their arguments.
I'm very,
Um,
I'm very glad to hear you say that.
um, so does it seem that way to you? Like the book will be frustrating to politicians who would try to use it as a example?
Um, yeah, I've never quite thought about that, and I have thought about the fact that this country as a whole seems most comfortable, especially in the political sector, to believe we can resolve our issues through these broad, bombastic, clear, two-sided discourses. In this case, you could say a guy who decides to deal drugs deserves no sympathy, or you could say that a Yale graduate who felt he had to sell drugs in order to succeed, and we're talking about a drug that is now legal in upwards of 20 states. Um, you know, if you don't want to give him your sympathy, then at least you could give him some thought. Um, and there's just this gray area in between the two extremes always, and that's what Rob referred to his drug dealing. He called it his gray area. He believed every successful politician or businessman or real estate tycoon had a gray area, or more than one. And if you read the papers and you look around, it's hard to refute that notion, especially from the perspective of a a fatherless boy from Orange, New Jersey.
Yeah. So having done fiction and nonfiction, like.
I'm sorry, you're freezing again.
Okay.
So actually, I
having done
have
fiction
a
and nonfiction,
sort of
what's next for you?
I'm sort of knee-deep in another nonfiction book that has to do with high school and college football and loss of identity when a guy who fixed his life to football leaves it. And if Rob Peace is a story of a guy harboring an excess of identities, this is a story about losing your identity, and it actually has a happy ending as well.
Oh, that's great. So you mentioned being an introvert, but learning how to knock on doors is, I mean, you can clearly do that for your new job, right?
Yeah. But I just read this book, Quiet, by Susan Cain, which is just about how to manage being an introvert in a society that sort of values the other way. And um, a one-on-one conversation is a great space to be in, and I get a lot from it. And yeah, I really enjoy that. I'm looking forward to doing it some more.
Good. Well, as I said, congrats on the book, and we'll work on this and get it ready for next week.
Thank you so much. I sure appreciate your time, and this was a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay, well, have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.